Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's event, which is a Q&A event called Cloud Security 101. We're presenting this event in partnership with Illumio, and to that end, I'm very happy that we have Faraz Aladdin here, who is the head of technical product marketing for Illumio. Faraz, thank you for joining us for today's event.
Thank you for having me, Scott. Happy to be here.
I'm Scott Lowe. I'm with Actual Tech Media, and I'll be your host for today's event. And before we get started, there's a few housekeeping items I want to make sure you keep in mind. Number one, this is a Q&A event, and the Q part is really important. We want you to ask questions. The questions that we're asking today have been sourced from the audience. And we've also sprinkled a few in to help you learn about Illumio. But we have sourced most of our questions today from you during the registration process. If you ask the question during the registration process, there's a good chance that your question is going to be asked on today's event. If you have other questions that come up during the event about cloud security or about what Illumio does, please make sure you ask them using the questions pane in the GoToWebinar control panel. Faraz and I will be taking your questions live, so keep them coming, because we want to make sure that when you walk away from today's event, you're an expert in cloud security. And at the end of today's event, we'll be giving away 3 $100 Tango gift cards. These are cards you can use at lots of different places rather than just a simple Amazon one or something. And we look forward to announcing who our 3 winners are shortly. And with that out of the way, let's get underway. We have an hour for today, so we're going to try to fill it up with answers to your most burning questions. But we want to start with asking Faraz basically to tell us a little bit about Illumio and its role in helping secure public and private cloud environments.
Sure. Thanks, Scott. Let me quickly start by saying, Illumio actually is in the business of helping customers protect their assets. And Illumio does that by a technology, microsegmentation. We deliver microsegmentation to help prevent the spread of breaches anywhere in your data center or in public clouds, multiples of them. And the idea is that, people, enterprises, most customers have accepted the thesis that they will probably get breached at one point or the other. And the bigger question is if they do get breached, when they do get breached, how do they stop this lateral spread? So malicious actor or whoever gets in, how can they prevent further damage? They're already in your network. They're inside your house. How do you prevent further damage from them going room to room and collecting all the valuables and knowing everything about you and doing further damage? That's the business Illumio is in. So we help customers protect their applications and data.
One of the things that I still see when I go to some organizations is there's this idea that because they have an edge firewall, they're all set. And nothing can be further from the truth. What you're doing is you're basically helping organizations put little firewalls between all of their systems internally so that they can stop the spread of infiltration if someone does happen to get behind the firewall.
Correct, yes. And as we go through the session today, we'll talk about it, and I'll give you a couple of examples, but you're absolutely right that today most people rely on firewalls at the perimeter to stop that intruder from coming in. But the challenge always is that if you get past that, then there are very little, if any, controls inside your house or inside your network to stop that lateral east-west movement. And that's exactly the problem that Illumio helps us solve.
Perfect. So we talked a little bit about this, but what specifically is microsegmentation? This is one of the questions from the audience that came in. And why are organizations seeking to deploy it? I think we already talked about the second part, but a little bit more in depth. What is microsegmentation?
Sure. So let me explain a little bit, and I'll use an analogy. Hopefully that will help. Segmentation as a term is something that people have probably heard in the networking industry, and it has been around for some time. And the idea for segmentation is really, think of, if you were building a submarine, typically the way submarines are built is you have compartments inside that submarine. Sometimes, let's say, if you were to build a submarine, say, I want a lot of room inside there. There are no compartments, one nice big hull. Now imagine if this kind of a submarine had a breach and it started to take in water. The chances are that the water will fill up the entire submarine over time, and it probably will sink. Now, had you built a submarine in a manner that people do build with compartments, chances are very high that if it did have a breach, the water will come in, but it'll probably be relegated to that small compartment that you had created. And it is a very good chance of staying up. Another way to look at it is, sort of the castle. If you have a castle, there's a guard that is outside the castle who says whether can you go in or not. But if you do get past that, then you can go to every single room inside over there if you don't have any protections. So the concept of microsegmentation is to divide up your network into smaller chunks, smaller pieces. So should somebody get in, they're not going to be able to roam around freely into your entire network. They're probably going to be relegated to a small piece. And that small piece could actually be a application. It could be a single workload within an application. It could be a single tier of the application or even a process. So that's where the micro comes in. Instead of using networking constructs like people have used in the past. So segmentation as a term is not necessarily new. People have used segmentation techniques from the time we started linking computers together. They would use VLANs, IP subnets, etc. The micro in the microsegmentation is the ability for you to segment your network out in very, very granular manner. You can get down to as granular as to restrict to a single process. So now imagine if you have an intruder who got in somehow, but they landed on a workstation and they thought they're going to skate around from there to other things. But by way of microsegmentation, you sort of now stranded them on that workload, and not even that workload. It could just be a process on that workload. They can't even get out anywhere else out of that. So that's the idea behind microsegmentation. And just to add to, why are organizations using it, we alluded to that. But the fact is that if, I am inside your house and I am unseen and I can skate around freely everywhere, that's a problem. I'm now in the position to be able to see where all the valuables are, who goes in at what time, who comes in at what time, and I can do all sorts of things. And organizations obviously want to protect their assets and data. They don't want this thing happen. So they are using microsegmentation more and more to prevent that stuff.
We actually have a question from the audience, and it's really an interesting one here. And so we're going to get this really jumping right into the deep end, but how liable would my company be on if there's a security breach for our stuff that's in the public cloud? And as I look at it, I mean, unless there's something contractually with the cloud provider that says otherwise, companies are on the hook whether the data is on premises or in the cloud, right?
Yes, it is going to be the responsibility of the company that is putting their assets in the public cloud to protect themselves. So security in a public cloud environment is shared responsibility. The sharing part comes in where the cloud provider assumes the responsibility for securing the underlying network and the elements of the network. So that's to say that Amazon will protect their network so that nobody can get in and muck around with their infrastructure, switches, hypervisors, etc. inside, which you don't get to see or have any control over as a customer. The sharing part on the customer side comes in is that you are responsible for protecting the data that you are putting in there and your applications, whether it is to whatever techniques you use or things like let's say the simple example of antivirus. A public cloud is not going to assume that responsibility. That's customer's responsibility. So that's where the shared model comes in. So customers are, liable if you are putting a application in public cloud, and let's say you're under regulatory compliance, whether it's PCI or any other things, you are responsible. It's not the cloud provider for the security of that application.
I do think people sometimes forget that because something's in the cloud doesn't mean you abdicate responsibility for things like security, data protection, backup, things like that. You still have to make sure those things are getting done.
Correct. That is absolutely correct.
This is actually a good segue to this question, which is we look at compliance demands, particularly as we compare an on-premises environment with a cloud environment. How have things changed with regard to compliance as organizations seek to adopt public cloud as a platform?
Yeah. So actually, I'll tell you that, in the last couple of years, we have seen a lot of compliance and regulations being driven in very stringent manner. And part of it is obviously the number of breaches, but part of it is also actually taking systemic risk out of the system. I'll give you an example. So if you are a financial institution, you are a part of SWIFT network. SWIFT is a consortium based out of Belgium, and essentially anything that people do as part of financial services industry, if you're a bank, credit union, etc., they become part of the SWIFT, so they are able to exchange funds with each other, and that's the SWIFT network. And now, a year and a half ago, there were a couple of breaches. The minute those breaches happened, and I can get into details of that particular one, SWIFT as an organization came up with a list of requirements that everybody as a member institution has to adhere to, and they will get audited. Now, that was just a canary in the coal mine, as they say, because Swift went out early. Following their lead, there are many other regulatory bodies that have come down on customers and said that not only now that you have to meet those requirements, you will get audited. And if you fail audit, there are some consequences, and some very harsh consequences in many cases. So as organizations, and this has become more stringent because these organizations are seeing, so Swift is watching this, PCI, retail environment. As people are putting workloads in public cloud, they want to make sure that organizations are taking the right steps to protect those applications, because it doesn't abdicate them from the responsibility that they have to protect patient data, they have to protect customer data, they have to protect credit card data, they have to protect their Swift application. All of those things are still customers' responsibility. And the example for the Swift network that I wanted to give you was about a year and a half ago, there was a big heist called Bangladesh Bank Heist. It's a great article if you have not read it in New York Times. It's actually written in the genre of like a crime novel. But essentially, it was a big deal. That's when the Swift as an organization literally woke up and said, we have to do this. So to answer your question, the demands on organizations have increased quite a bit from public organizations as well as government bodies. Swift network is one, and there are regulatory bodies that do this in retail environment, healthcare, energy sector, and they're all tightening the requirements, and they are making it so that if you do not pass the audit, like in the case of Swift, the consequence is if you are a credit union, a bank, a financial institution, part of the Swift network, if you fail the audit, they are going to put your name among all the other members so that, hey, this particular institution failed their requirements. Now, what that means is they may or may not choose to do business with you now. And also, they will also send it to the regulators of that particular country that, hey, this particular institution, which is a financial institution in your country, failed audits. This could be a risk to you. So the consequences are becoming very, very material now.
And it doesn't necessarily have to do with the fact that they're adopted public cloud, although there are some specific compliance requirements there. You have to make sure that the cloud is compliant with certain standards. But this is whether we're doing cloud or not, these sorts of compliance things are going to be continuing to get more strict anyway.
Absolutely. And what is happening, what we have seen, you correctly said that these requirements are in place regardless of whether you are in cloud or in on-prem. But a lot of times what we've also seen customers have their DR sites in, let's say, a public cloud. Should their main location PCI application go down, they can quickly bring that up in a public cloud in a DR site. Or they may have distributed applications across regions and geographies, where in some places you have your own data center, but in other places you may be residing in a public cloud. So for the organization, it's that application they need to protect regardless of where they reside, because the consequences are at the application, not where it resides.
So we have another question that came in from the audience, and the question is, being geographically diverse, how do we ensure that GDPR regulations are not breached through the use of a cloud platform? And I guess my answer is it doesn't matter if it's cloud or not. I mean, but there is a point at which where does responsibility for the cloud provider come in with GDPR compliance requirements?
So for public clouds, the responsibility for them comes in data residency requirements. So if you are a public cloud provider, and if you say, I'm hosting your data, you are still responsible for encrypting your data, whether in motion or at rest, and your application. But the cloud provider has a responsibility for data residency. For example, if you are in a particular country, and if that country mandates that, hey, whatever data you are going to be providing to users, it has to remain in this country. It cannot be wherever else you want to put. So that is the public cloud provider's responsibility. They have to ensure that they meet that requirement. But it still doesn't take any responsibility away from the customer. If I, as a customer, am running a PCI retail application, and that application resides in New York and California and Ireland, I may be having it in California in my own data center. I may be having it in New York in a hosted location, and I may be having it in Ireland in an AWS space. Well, I'm responsible for all three. AWS will only be responsible for the data residency in Ireland if Ireland as a country chooses to do that. But I'm responsible for making sure that I meet the requirements of GDPR at the data level, that I am protecting that data.
Perfect. Okay, so with regards to making a move to the public cloud, what does Illumio do specifically to help customers in this journey?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I think this is one of those scenarios. I'll give you with an example. It will probably help you understand that. So first, Illumio actually helps customers devise their security posture in a very unique way, which has sort of become the industry norm. Up till now, if you look at security, security has always been tied to networking constructs. Security was always very deeply rooted to tying into VLANs and IP subnets, firewall zones, etc. And therein lies the challenge, because you are intricately tied to the underlying mechanisms, transport mechanisms. If they change for any reason, or if you upgrade your network, you have to make those changes to security as well. So the first thing, and this is what we have heard from customers over the years, is that decouple security from networking constructs. So that way, I'm not tied into the network, because if I go to public cloud, I don't even own the network. I can't even see what's in the network. And if I make any changes, even in my own place where I own the network, it really is very disruptive. So decoupling that security aspect from networking constructs is one of the key principles. So Illumio obviously has done that and done that very well. So one might ask, then what are those other constructs that we're using for security? Well, most everybody in the industry has sort of levitated to the fact that you need to use some sort of metadata, whether it's labels that are based on role of the application or the location, etc. So that's the first concept to remember. So now, how does customers benefit, from Illumio technology? So take an example. If a customer has CEO come down and say, we have consciously decided that we're going to adopt public cloud, and for these 5 applications, we are going to move to the cloud. Now, the CIO has this responsibility of making that transition or that migration, but do it in a secure manner, because you can't afford to have those applications go up in the cloud, open it up to users for service, and not have secured them. So the answer is, okay, great, let's move it and then we'll secure it. Well, sometimes security does not follow the speed of the business. What if you are looking at opening that up tomorrow or day after tomorrow, but not 2 months from when the time you put in? So what Illumio allows you to do is actually create the security policies for this particular application. And for Illumio, policies stay with the workloads, so they are portable and they're elastic. Wherever your workload goes, the policy goes. So you can actually devise your entire set of security policies for that application and have that for that application. When you move to public cloud, policy goes with it. So the day you open up in the cloud, you are secure. So it's almost like security at first. So that's how Illumio helps customers move to the public cloud. And for Illumio's solution, actually does not matter where the compute resides. We don't go to where your network is. We go where your applications are. So let's say you could have an application, portion of it is let's say it's a tiered application. You have your web tier residing in AWS. You have your application tier residing in some hosted location, and you have your databases still on-prem, running on bare metal. For Illumio, it's no different than if everything was in one place or distributed all over. We can protect that entire application for you. And if you move these pieces around, security policy stays intact. If you scale that application up or down based on your business needs, the security policies adjust to it. So really, we make it very easy for you to secure cloud migration, cloud adoption, and protecting all the apps that are running in a distributed manner.
A reminder to our audience, we've got a couple of great questions already from the audience, and we really do want to answer your questions. So if you have more questions, please make sure you ask them in the questions panel and go to webinar, and we will, as you can see, be taking them live, and they're all good questions. So one of the things to bear in mind here is security has become really a top-of-mind issue for executives and leaders, and they're spending literally billions of dollars on this across companies every year. But it seems like we're constantly hearing about new cyber attacks and new breaches. And the question from the audience was, why is that? And I mean, part of it is the fact that these bad guys always want more money or more whatever they're trying to accomplish. But why is it that with the advent of new security tools, we're still hearing about breaches all the time?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think from our experience and in talking to many of the customers, what they realize is that the customers who have successfully gotten a handle on security and securing their applications are always of the mindset that security is not a one-time thing. It's not a one and done. It's an iterative process. You sort of are continually in that cycle. You secure things, you monitor, you detect, you see newer ways of, attacks that come in, and you adjust to that. You adjust your profile. So that's one of the reasons is that the bad guys are not giving up. They're not sleeping. They're constantly devising new ways to do stuff, and hence we also have to stay on our toes. So which means that there is a continual investment, not just in terms of dollars, but in terms of mind share, in terms of people, processes, etc. So to do that. The second part of it is also is that many a times a lot of these mechanisms that the customers use, they're carryovers from the times when they used to try and protect things, 10, 15 years ago. As an example, if you were using firewalls to defend your data center, and that's what you are looking to do today, you are going to be adopting some very expensive solutions to do microsegmentation, which is internally inside the network segmenting it out. So if you choose to, put your resources in yesterday's technology to sort of protect today's environment, there's a little bit of a mismatch. And therein lies the challenge that even though a lot of customers have invested dollars into this environment, they probably had not done certain things that are more applicable and relevant in today's time, like microsegmentation example, or some of the identity management tools. These are all things that customers need in the environment. But if you are not going to follow the pace of technology change and continue to invest in yesterday's technology, you may find that there is a mismatch between what you are putting in, investing in, the results that you're getting out. Scott, I think, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, no, someone's muted me. I'm not quite sure why. So the next question we have is, what is application visibility? I think you've talked about this a little bit already, but let's go a little deeper. And why is it important? Yeah. And then we do have another question from the audience that we'll take as well.
Sure. Yeah, this is actually another area which Illumio has put in a lot of effort in. And the reason for that is it's actually, in my mind, very simple, is what you can't see, you can't protect. Organizations' ultimate goal is to protect their applications and data. Everything else is a means to get to that. And unless you understand how your applications are talking to each other and how they are behaving, you're not going to be able to protect them. Applications don't live on an island. I mean, they talk to each other. That's how business flows. Your inventory management application is probably talking to your asset management or to your CRM or to your billings and payment system. Now, this is how data centers were designed. Overall, you wanted to maintain open connectivity, pure to, let's say, anybody can talk to anything. And that's the attack surface. If you do not understand how your applications are talking to each other, you are not going to be able to protect them. So if you don't see that, hey, here's my CRM three-tiered application, it is talking to my two-tiered payments application, should the database from the CRM application be talking to the database in this payments application? Maybe that sounds right, maybe not. But unless you're able to see that, you're not going to be able to protect it. In the security world, they say the first principle of security is try and be as close to the subject that you are trying to protect. The further you move away, the less visibility you have, you're going to have a problem. And this is where visibility becomes very important. Think about it, if somebody did an MRI on your data center, or you start to see things that you had never seen before. That's like application visibility. Almost, 2/3 of our customers, when we talk to them, the first time they see this map of their own application, their own environment, they have this aha moment. Oh, really? I did not know this is how my applications are behaving. And what is this connection going from this particular workload to this application? Why is it doing that? It should not be doing that. That's really when you understand that, oh, I have this open hole or this attack surface, I should be restricting things like that. And that's why application visibility is so important. It's all about seeing things so you can protect them.
Yeah, that's one of the things as I've deployed applications in the past. I mean, it used to be early on, nobody cared. It just open, keep it wide open. And then there was a point at which applications were bundled with networking guides that listed 3,000 ports you had to open up between every service. And it was sometimes it was really eye-opening to see exactly how much was going on.
Yeah. There are some very interesting examples of applications that open up thousands of ports in the high range. And now you really have a tough time securing that. But you are right, absolutely.
Another question from the audience, and so the question is, out of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service, which one is least vulnerable to threats or has the least attack surface in the cloud, in your opinion, or in your experience?
So from a customer perspective, the area where they have to worry the least about is the software as a service environment, because that's where the provider assumes complete responsibility for securing everything. So as an example, like Salesforce is one of our customers. Salesforce uses actually Illumio's technology to protect the service they provide to others. Similarly, there are other people who do that, Workday, etc. So if you are in a SaaS environment, then the customers really have all the flexibility that, hey, security is being taken care of for this application by Salesforce, by Workday, whoever it is. It's their responsibility. All I'm responsible for is making sure that the data that I'm providing is encrypted and secure. The least secure one probably is the infrastructure, because as we said, it's a shared responsibility model where the provider of the infrastructure is going to say, I will protect the infrastructure, my infrastructure that you are renting from me. What you put on that is your responsibility. It's kind of like, the freeways and the roads. Those are the government's responsibility. They will deal with it. They will repair it. They'll take care of it. The car that you're driving on that road is your responsibility. You are buying the insurance for that. You are keeping that up and maintaining it. So in that sense, infrastructure as a service is where this shared responsibility is, where the customer has to assume a lot more responsibility. And platform as a service resides somewhere in between, where some of the underlying components are secured. They give you sort of a platform to run your things on. So somewhere in between the SaaS and the infrastructure environment is where the platform resides. But in all of these cases, it still doesn't take you away from the fact that you have to protect your data. And especially in the case of infrastructure, not only just your data, but the applications and your workload that you're bringing in, the car that you're bringing in to drive on that freeway.
Yeah, I think that goes back to your point before. In a SaaS world, you're not abdicating security responsibility. They're going to take care of more for you, but that doesn't mean you have to just. It's a non-threat or something you don't even think about. And I do still see that as I'm going to make that somebody else's problem, when in reality it still is your problem. They're just going to help you more. So,
yes.
Our next question is, what are some of the specific use cases that are addressed by Illumio solution, and how is it unique in the market? And do you have some slides you want to share on this one?
Sure. I think that might be a good way to kind of give a little bit of an idea. Let me show you something that is Okay, I think that you should be able to see a slide which talks about how customers use Illumio. And this will be a good sort of view to start thinking about what Illumio does and how customers benefit from it. Customers use Illumio in a variety of different ways. But if we look across the broad range of use cases, they sort of fall into one of these 6 or 7 buckets. There are variations of that. The first one I would say is a lot of our customers use Illumio technology just to get visibility, mapping application dependencies, seeing what's in their environment, what is talking to what, so that they can protect. Just really, even that aspect is very enlightening for them. We have customers who actually use Illumio just for that. They don't even do any security enforcement, but just to get the visibility. But very quickly then we find customers also start to go after the low-hanging fruit, which is, hey, you know what, at least let me do something very broad brush. Let me separate out my environments, separate development from test, from production as an example. It's a quick win. It's something to clearly delineate, because there are lots of things you may do in development which you will never think of doing in a production environment. You may have an application which you are still working on, and you have a production copy of it, but you also have a development environment for it. Just separate them out. So that's a very low-hanging fruit. The next one you will probably see is more like application microsegmentation. This is where sometimes people use the term application ring fencing, with the idea being that you take your high-value assets, your crown jewel applications, or applications that are under regulations, and you have to meet compliance. You take those set of workloads wherever they reside and put a software perimeter around it. And now anything within that software bubble can talk to each other all day long, but nothing comes in or goes out unless you allow it to say. So that's sort of another area where customers use us. You may have a Swift banking application. You may, have your inventory management application that's your high-value asset or crown jewel. You can just ring-fence them. Then people actually also go around to do a little bit more granular segmentation with, using the tiers of the application to lock them down, or even down to a process, if you will. The other one, as I mentioned, is secure migration to the cloud. Customers actually devise all of their security policies, stage them up, test them out, validate them, and have them in place before they actually move the application or parts of the application to the cloud, so that when it comes up over there, it comes up secure. There is no lag. This is what enterprises want. They want security to travel at the speed of business. People want to put up their applications and open up to users in days and hours, not weeks and months. And if you do not have security in place before, organizations don't feel comfortable opening it up. So this is security at birth. That's another way customers use Illumio. Securing a new data center, whether it's new for you or maybe it's new to you because you acquired a company, mergers and acquisitions and things like that. You may have completely different systems. How do you bring all of these into the fold without disrupting business and securing all of them? Customers use Illumio for that as well. I mentioned that, microsegmentation can even take it down to ports and processes. That's where the concept of nano-segmentation comes in sometimes, where you can actually even lock it down to a specific process. An example might be, let's say you have a 3-tier application and your database tier has 4 databases. You could say that, hey, these databases can talk to each other, but only on this particular port using Redis or TCP as a protocol, only for Redis as a service. So now you've gone very, very granular. So customers use us in that fashion as well. They might start with simple ring fencing of applications, but then they might microsegment it down to the tiers and down even to the process. We also actually talk to Active Directory so we can bring in the user connotation. So that way you can devise policies to say, hey, somebody's going to be connecting into a database, they better be a part of a database admin group because nobody else has business connecting into it straight. Applications will talk to database directly. So if you are connecting into a database, we can actually check if you are a member of the database admin group. And if you are, we will allow you, otherwise not. So I think these are some of the most common ways we see customers use. There are always variations or specific things people do. And we have lots of mechanisms and features in our portfolio that make it even more attractive. But this is, I would say, sort of the general landscape of how people use Illumio.
While we're switching back, one of the questions we just got is Illumio a monitoring service as well?
Can you just repeat the question? What was the question?
Is Illumio also a monitoring service?
Oh, is Illumio monitoring service? So let me clarify. You can monitor your application flows and are they adhering to the policy or not. So monitoring in that sense, yes. We actually, by way of our security policies, can report to you that, hey, there is a flow that violated your policy. Or in times of audits and compliance where you actually need a reporting mechanism. The auditor walks in and there's this common edict in customers. They say that if you can't prove it or show it to the auditor that you have done the things you're supposed to do, you might as well not do it. Because everything you have done, if you can't show it to them in a manner that they understand, it's a lost cause. So we actually have built functionality to our product. You can do reporting. You can show, for example, in my PCI environment, who is talking to who, when was the first flow did we see, historically, how did it happen, which other applications were talking into it. So monitoring at that level, absolutely we do that. Monitoring at the level of are you violating any security policies, we absolutely do that. I just wanted to clarify because monitoring is a big bucket. There's a lot of monitoring for networking components, etc., which obviously we don't touch. So that's why I just want to clarify, yes, those pieces of monitoring as it relates to our side of security, we absolutely do.
I'm going to ask the next question.
The other thing, if I might, the one thing I might add, is we actually, our product is entirely completely API based. So we integrate very well with many of the other entities that provide higher level of functionality, like an SIEM system. So we actually integrate very well with Splunk, with ServiceNow for other purposes. So that's yet another step, where we really work with our APIs and our partners to give you additional functionality.
Perfect. We have some questions that came from the audience. We'll take those in just a second. Before we do that, it goes down into sort of the vertical piece a little bit. So there's a lot of government agencies that are concerned about the cloud due to data protection. Obviously, how do we address this? Obviously, things like GovCloud and things like that now. But what are some of the other things that our government agencies should be thinking about with regard to security? And this actually goes with a question we got from the audience as well, but it's not around government, but it's around healthcare. So it's basically healthcare seems to be a tough environment to justify setting up an electronic medical records management system in the public cloud. So when these things need to necessarily be separate from other things. So how do you deal with these vertical-centric requirements around government or around healthcare and things like that?
Sure. Let me start with the government piece first, because it's a little different in the sense that the government actually has the ability to create their own cloud. So, even if AWS is providing government their services, it's a cloud just for them. So having said that, putting it aside, government agencies have, in fact, a higher degree of responsibility for protecting applications, because there are some situations where it's not just monetary thing. It could actually mean social upheaval. It could mean any and all varieties of things, like utilities and things like get targeted, or military installations, etc. So government agencies actually have a big program to secure things. And one of the big things in that is the whole zero trust concept. And it's the concept of using microsegmentation, leveraging to stop lateral movement, like we talked about. How do we make it specific and more palatable to the government environments? Is we have to stick to the frameworks that the government has developed, so that you have to show it to them that the framework that has been developed by Cybersecurity Command or many of the other agencies, they laid out the NIST framework. You should do this, thou shalt do this, and Illumio can actually help you meet all of those requirements. There are some specific ones that call out for data encryption. There are specific ones that call out that you have to segregate certain applications so they can only talk to these sets of applications. So we actually meet many of the NIST framework requirements, and that's how we help the government agencies protect the lateral movement piece. Now, obviously, there are other things that the government agencies need to do, which they work with other vendors. But Illumio and the technology that Illumio provides, it's a big piece of the zero trust network. It's one of the foundational pieces of zero trust framework.
And as we look at healthcare, so the question that the person asked was around electronic medical records, and his specific question is, it needs to stay running 24/7, 365. This obviously can be too costly to have both an on-premises and 24/7, 365 scenario, so that's why they're turning to cloud. Is the healthcare environment really wise to move to a cloud source when it's probably best from a security perspective to keep it segmented off from it all being interconnected? I guess so. The question is there a business value or risk in moving it to the cloud when it has to be available 24/7?
Yeah. So I'll tell you that, if I look 5 years back, there are organizations that said that no way in hell, or no way I'm putting my, business critical applications or these set of applications. Yeah, maybe I'll adopt Office 365 on my email, or yeah, I have this, little inventory checking application that if it's down or not available, I'm fine with it. But all my other, business running, the critical applications, I'm not putting in the cloud. I'm keeping it on-prem. That was 5 years ago. Today, if I see many of the same organizations have actually started to put those production business, critical applications in the cloud as well. Now, it's not that everybody is doing it and doing it for every single application, but that movement has started. And I completely see that in probably the next another 3 to 5 years, more of it will go into the cloud, or more of it will go outside of on-prem environments. So if I come back to healthcare environments, today and by design, a lot of these critical applications run on-prem. And so is still the case for a lot of the banking environments. A lot of the financial services applications, in fact, believe it or not, still run on Solaris databases on virtualized environments sitting in somewhere. As much as we might want to think that the whole world is virtualized, and it is, there's still a lot of it that runs on bare metal in data centers. So I think most of our customers are taking the steps towards the cloud. I have no doubt in my mind that at some point, even healthcare organizations are going to start putting some of those. There was a time 5 years ago, I would not do bill pay, and many people were like me. There was a time when people would not say, I'm not checking my credit card balance on that particular web app that you are providing me. Who knows how secure it's that? Today, we all take it for granted, and we do it, and not take it for granted because we don't care about our stuff, but we feel reasonably confident that that's fine. And I think there will come a point of time for healthcare as well. But I think for healthcare and in many other industries, it's not just only about the technology. It's also about the people and the processes that go hand in hand. If technology was the answer to every single problem, we would probably be in a different world. But, ultimately, technology works with people. People use technology. So a lot of these healthcare organizations, they actually have organizational things to do as well, and, modify themselves or evolve themselves organizationally also. But the question is valid. I personally do see that over the course of next 3 to 5 years, some of the applications that are running on-prem for healthcare organizations, including medical health records, will probably migrate to cloud. If not everything, at least start portions of it. And there are some, law-related things, regulations will also have to come out that certain things will need to be done in a certain way. What is the policies for accessing or between, healthcare institutions, etc. So there is a technology side, there's a people process side, and there's a regulation side as well. And I think as they move in unison, I expect that people will be running those things in public cloud at some point.
One other thing I want to make sure the audience is aware of is that there are 2 handouts available from Illumio that you'll see in the handouts pane in the Go to Webinar Control panel. A couple of really informative white papers around what Illumio does and around cloud. So make sure you download those if you want to learn more. We're going to move on to our next question, which is, are there basic compliance guidelines that organizations need to use in their journey to the cloud? Maybe not industry specific, or vertical specific, but what are some of the basic compliance guidelines they should keep in mind?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and certainly, some of the work Illumio has done and provided it as collateral. In fact, I think one of them is probably as part of our Q&A session today that people can download and read, and it will help them step by step. Here are some of the steps. But just to answer your question, there are some key things that we always, advise customers, and actually we have learned from them how they have done it. Number one, from a compliance standpoint, even if you're not in a regulatory environment, you might have your own internal compliance things. I'll give you an example. There are large law firms. There are no regulations today for law firms for specifically related to this, but the customers that they deal with, their customers tend to be large banks, etc. They actually audit these law firms to say, are you keeping our data protected, our intellectual property, or all of this? Because if we audit you and you find you're not up to snuff or up to our requirements, we won't do business with you. So even though that law firm does not have a government regulation, they have the same amount of responsibility to show it to their customers that they can do this thing. So coming back to what are some of the compliance guidelines for organizations, even if they're not under regulatory purview, is number one, to ensure that all the basic system hardening things in place, patching of your operating systems, making sure that you're not, using loose passwords or default passwords and things like that. So just, the basic hygiene, even though nobody comes out and tells you that this is part of the compliance, sometimes, more than half the problems is right there. I don't know how many times I can tell you I've seen default passwords on internet-facing routers. So, that's sort of the one aspect of it, system hardening. The other one is create as much visibility into your application environment as you can, because if you cannot see how your applications are behaving, you are going to have a very hard time protecting them or migrating them or, scaling them in any manner. If you're going to be, doing it blind, good luck is all I can tell you, because you are going to run into some problem at some point in time. The third, I would say, is that devise your security policies decoupled from your networking constructs. Use higher level constructs to devise your security policies, because the underlying network mechanisms will change. I guarantee you that even if you are in your own on-prem data center environment and choose to be that way forever, you are going to see changes, because people do, upgrade networks, newer devices, digital transformation, any or all of these things means that if you are going to rely on networking constructs, it is going to become much harder for you to be agile and flexible and travel at the speed of business. And last but not the least, I would say that, technology is one side of the house. Increasingly, what we find that to have a good security posture, you need to have common ground between not just the infrastructure teams and just the security operations team or the CISO teams, but increasingly we also see sometimes now development community coming into play. We had a customer who basically said that, if I have to rely on my networking teams and SecOps teams just to create, I have 1,800 applications in my environment. I'll need a ministry of segmentation to do this thing. I have to actually empower my app owners to be able to say, because they understand the applications best, for them to say, my application needs to be able to talk to these two applications across these three protocols and flows. Everything else I don't care about and I should not be talking to. So I think increasingly what we are finding that common ground between different organizations that they need to participate in to make it successful. So if I were to recap, I would say, basic hygiene with hardening, application visibility, making sure that you are using higher level constructs, not just IP constructs, and making sure that you're not just making the technology feasible, but also organizationally it's adaptable.
A question from the audience, and bear with me for a second while I make sure I get this right. So the person originally asked a question around data transmission and encryption between systems, and I asked for a little bit more clarification to make sure I get the context right. And the question is, the data transmission question has to do with the security side of the cloud. Having customer to provider connections encrypted and secured is one main area of necessity in protecting, but also the intra-server connections. For example, if someone breaks into the cloud environment, if the servers communicating, application servers, etc., data is encrypted between each other when making the transactions requested, that would be yet another layer of protection, even if someone were to manage to get into the environment. And so the question that the person asked was, what about encryption of data transmissions, not only for the customer service provider, but also intra-server pieces? What steps are organizations taking in the cloud to secure that intra-server stuff, and as well as between cloud systems and on-premises systems? And I guess the next piece of that is, how does Illumio help with that? I assume that if there's a visibility component that could be pretty powerful.
Correct. So let me answer that question. That's a great question. In fact, it is the responsibility for the customer to encrypt data in motion where required. As an example, in the Swift framework, there are a total of 27 controls, 16 mandatory and 11 optional. Of those 16 mandatory controls, one of them is thou shalt encrypt data, even between two Swift workloads. Even if between the same Swift application, two separate workloads, you will encrypt data. And actually, Illumio has made it super simple to achieve that. So we actually do support encryption of data in motion for both Windows and Linux environment. We have a feature called Secure Connect, which transparent. All you have to do is put a click check mark, and it will initiate an IPsec connection between those two workloads. So wherever you have a flow, and you can even have it as part of your policy, it will actually be encrypted data flowing between those two instances. So coming back to the larger question, that in some cases it is actually a requirement from the compliance organizations that you will do that, otherwise you will fail that audit. And second, even if you're not in a compliance environment, many customers just see this as good hygiene, that if we are talking to other systems or other applications, even within the same company, you might have a team that has developed an application and now it's talking to some other application in some other part of the organization. Let's encrypt the data that flows between these two. So that is also something that organizations do keep in mind. And third part, which you brought up, which is also equally important, if not more, is especially when you have an application talking out of public cloud into a application of the same kind or a different one residing on-prem, it is always a good practice, if you can, to have that data encrypted. And Illumio makes it super easy. We not only support it, we actually have a very easy mechanism to turn it on.
So what are if you had to think of the top 3 things organizations need to keep in mind as they're making their jump into the cloud, what would those 3 things be from a security perspective?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say, if you are making the journey to the cloud, take the time to understand your application environment, and that starts with application visibility. That is the first thing you want to be able to do before you start migrating, or before you start to understand to say what parts of the application are going to move. I have seen organizations where they have taken the web tier of a 3-tier application and they have moved it to the cloud, and they did not move, let's say, the processing tier or some other component that had to go with it. And then now they have started to see application response time issues. So they really didn't understand the application or didn't see that this web tier had to talk to this in a certain manner, and we should be moving the application tier with it along with the web. So that's one example of why visibility is important. So that's the first thing I would say. Second, I think you probably see that organizations are not just going to wake up one day and say, hey, I want to, microsegment the whole environment to stop the lateral environment. I'm going into cloud. Identify your high value assets. What are your key crown jewel applications? Because everybody starts at some point. If you are a financial institution, they say, okay, great. My first priority is to protect my Swift application. Then I'm going to go to my, let's say, core services, Active Directory, and other things that everybody talks to. Then I'm going to go to my asset management application. So that's sort of the way people look at it. So outside of, your visibility, you need to be able to identify what you want to go after first. What are your high value assets, your crown jewel applications that you want to protect? Third, make sure that you decide upfront what is your strategy to protect that application? Are you going to do a simple ring fence? You can start there because that's the least brittle form. You won't break anything. And then slowly over time, you can actually start doing a little bit more granular microsegmentation. Last but not the least, I would say is that do remember security is not a one-time thing. It's an iterative process. You absolutely have to monitor it and adjust as your application needs change. Your application may start talking to other applications after you have devised a security policy. So make sure that you understand you have a real-time view of your application communication so you can adjust the policies as needed.
I think that your last point is critically important. I think people, and I don't think this is very common anymore, I think it used to be, but people can't see security as a project. They have to see it as a mindset. And I think we're seeing a lot of that change with things like DevSecOps and things like that coming into play, where we're seeing, operations and security work more closely. I do want to let the audience know that we launched a poll just to ask you, how concerned are you with security in your cloud journey? We've had a number of you answer. I'm going to close the poll and we'll take a look at what our results are. And let me share those results. So 58% of people have some concern, 19% have major concern. So that's concerning, I guess is a good word.
Yes.
Very few have no concerns. I'm actually surprised it's that high about it. And some don't have any cloud plans, which is not a surprise either, but the major concern is pretty significant. So lots of people out there are concerned about what they need to do with regard to their cloud journey. We had another question from the audience. I want to make sure I get this one right as well. The question is a two-part question. So what is the best way to deal with internal security in addition to external security? I think we talked about microsegmentation and things like that as being the answer. But the question is, this would be for hardware and software application development and support. So is there a different set of security standards we have to be thinking about with regard to software development and things like that? And I guess when I'm thinking about it, you want to be thinking about software development differently these days with a security first mindset as a part of the development process. But what are your thoughts on that?
No, absolutely correct. And I'll give you an example. Especially this becomes very relevant with containers. So a lot of organizations are starting to look at containers as the next wave of how they want to deploy their applications. Now, they may not go back and containerize every single application, and maybe not every single application is the right candidate for containerizing. But certainly a lot of organizations are using this containerized mechanism as the way forward looking things. Now, think about it. We went from one single bare metal server to something that would now have, let's say, 30, 40, 50 virtual machines on that one, to now having hundreds of thousands of containers running on a cluster of servers. And these containers are, very ephemeral in some cases. Some have high degree of persistence, but these containers come and go. Some live for a few hours. If your security does not come at birth and goes with it, how are you going to protect all these containers? You do not, by the time you devise and say, okay, now I need to secure this container and put it in and do all these rules, that container has already lived its life and gone, and it will wake up some other time. So I think you need to have security right along with these kinds of application development life cycles. We actually have customers who do this today. They actually develop containerized applications. So their developers, when they initiate this process, there's actually mechanisms built in via automation and other tools that the security aspects of it are baked into it along with the CI/CD cycle. And as the application gets rolled out, it is secure. It comes out secure because there's no way otherwise that you're going to be able to get a handle around some of these types of software development processes. So you're absolutely right. As the world is moving towards, containers and these serverless computing kinds of environments, people will have to think of security in a little bit different manner.
And we have our last question for the event, which is an easy one, I think, for you, as they all have been. If people want to try out Illumio, what's their best path forward?
Awesome. So Illumio has actually made it very easy for customers to not only gain access to our solution, but try it out as well. So if you go to Illumio's website and just look for test drive, it's right up front on the main page. People actually have the ability to download our software solution, put it in their environment, kick the tires around, and take it for a spin. Many of our customers do that, or if you want a specific demonstration or for your environment, you would be happy to engage in a conversation with you.
We actually have one more that came in from the audience. It's a really good one.
Sure.
So the question is, Should organizations have a separate policy for information security for cloud or cloud security, or should it be covered under a broader vendor management policy?
I think it has to not be very specific to just one environment, because what happens, people move applications all day long. Today you might be in one public cloud environment, you might move to another environment, or even for the same application, I might be hosting my applications in AWS over here in US, but it might be Google in Asia Pac as an example. Now, if you try and make it to vendor specific or provider specific, you lose that flexibility. And the other part of it is that you probably are going to have certain things that will be vendor specific based on your technology choices and preferences. Like, for example, if you are a ESXi shop, you might be looking to have certain types of technologies that, dive in with that maybe. But I think by and large, I think security needs to be treated as a mindset, as you said, and not looking at as for one application or one environment. You could be in different environments in many different locations. And I think that's the key to remember. It's more of a mindset. Think about how do you protect your applications versus which particular vendor I'm going with, or how do I protect it for this particular location. I think you might be muted again.
You're right. Sorry about that. So that really was our last question. So unless we get one more while I'm giving away some gift cards. First of all, Faraz, I want to say thank you very much for this great insight into cloud security and to what Illumio brings to the world. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
We have 3 gift card winners that we'll be giving. You'll be hearing from us after the event via email. So you'll be hearing from Melina, in case you're wondering. Sometimes we get questions. Is this real? Yes, if you get a message from Melina, it is real, I promise. She's awesome, and she loves giving away gift cards. We have Kathy Castro, Emil Raskovich, and William Shaw. The 3 of you will be getting an email after today's event with information on how to collect your $100 Tango gift card. Faraz, thank you once again for being here. Illumio, as always, thank you for being here on our events as well.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, everyone, for being here today.
And to our audience, please have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.